I was about half my age old when I experienced the most harrowing near-death experience of my life. I lived in an area called the Book Cliffs in my teens and 20s. It is so named because the mountain range contains cliff after cliff after cliff after cliff. It extends for hundreds and hundreds of miles. It is a remarkably beautiful area filled with canyons, ancient human history, rare plants and animals, fossils, ghost towns, abandoned mines, and dirt roads. It's a hiker's paradise. The interesting thing about the Book Cliffs is that there are many paths to the top of the mountains that snake around the many cliffs. I am not a rock climber and I am afraid of heights, so I am really good at finding those winding paths. I had noticed one of those paths in an area that I frequented. I had never before thought to climb that particular mountain, but once I noticed that opening to the top, it burrowed into my brains and nagged at me, until one day I decided to give it a try. It was a few miles deep into a canyon littered with ghost towns and abandoned mines. The slope of the mountain was rigorously steep all the way to the top. It took several hours to get there. By the time I got to the top, I was singing at the top of my lungs. There wasn't another human being around anywhere. It was such a beautiful, clear day, and the mountain was so tall that at the top of it, the view stretched for many miles, despite being tucked away so deeply into the canyon. I ate my small lunch and headed back down the mountain. It didn't take nearly as long to get back down the mountain, but it was grueling going down because of how steep it was. By the time I got close to my car, my legs were wobbly. I made it to the very last cliff, and just around the boulder, there was my car. I couldn't remember the path I took to get around this cliff. I looked to the left, and the cliff just kept going and going and going. I looked to the right, and about 100 yards away, I saw the path to avoid the cliff. I was exhausted. I wasn't really thinking. I turned right and headed toward the path. I took about 5 steps when I shuffled my feet too closely together. My higher foot tripped over my lower foot, and I fell. That spot was so sandy and so steep that I started sliding toward the edge of the cliff. I tried to stop myself, but within moments my legs went over the edge, and my torso was following them. I grabbed at 3 plants, and all 3 plants came out at the roots. Within seconds, I had gone from standing on my feet to falling off the cliff. As a kid, I was an avid reader of the Reader's Digest, a smaller than average magazine filled with all kinds of things to read. One of my favorite sections was called Drama in Real Life. Every month it covered story after story about people surviving crazy accidents. I still remember many of the gruesome stories in vivid detail. One such story applied to my current predicament. It told of a skydiver whose parachute failed to deploy. The parachutist deliberately landed spread eagle backwards and survived the fall with a whole bunch of broken bones. But at least he was still among the living. The moment I came off that cliff, the story of that desperate skydiver flooded my mind. I don't know how I did it, but I flipped around and spread out my arms and legs in spread eagle position, and I just kept falling. I knew that the longer I fell, the faster I would be going when I hit the ground. I shouted in fear, "I haven't hit yet! I haven't hit yet! I haven't hit yet!" And that's when I slammed into the ground. Sand, dirt, and dust flew everywhere. I was still conscious, but I immediately became aware that I couldn't breathe. The impact knocked the wind clean out of me. I fought desperately to take my first breath, but it just wouldn't happen. Seconds kept ticking by. My lungs began to ache, and then they burned like fire. Still, no breath would come. I literally thought to myself, I'm going to die because I can't breathe. I saw the blue sky beginning to fade away above me. Finally, the first breath came. Tears immediately leapt out of my eyes. The tears ran past my ears before I could regain my composure. I was laying on the ground, arms and legs still spread out. I remembered the skydiver story again. He had so many broken bones. I was most terrified that I had broken a bone in my spine. My entire body hurt, but not as much as I thought it should, and I knew that couldn't be a good sign. How do I test for a spinal injury? I carefully wiggled my fingers on my right hand, then I wiggled the fingers on my left. Okay, so far so good. I wiggled my right toes, then my left toes. My spinal cord was still responding down to my toes. I slowly tested out my right arm, then my left arm, my right leg, then my left leg. Everything was moving like it should. I was staring at the cliff above me, and I knew that I couldn't be that lucky. I was still worried about a back injury. My elbows, shoulders, knees, and hips were all working. The problem remained that I was mere yards away from my car, and I was all alone alone. I couldn't just lay there. I slowly raised myself up to a sitting position. My back felt fine. I extra cautiously moved my neck in every direction I could think of. It seemed fine. I took a good detailed look at my arms, hands, legs, and feet. Aside from a very healthy layer of dust covering me, everything was still attached and working like it always did. I looked the cliff up and down, and I said to myself, how did I survive that? My emotions went from sheer panic to absolute jubilation. I couldn't believe it. I was basking in the glory of my fresh defeat of death when I suddenly began to register a very strange feeling, and it was in an area that I hadn't thought to check yet. The more I sat there, the more the feeling registered as pain, but it wasn't a broken bones kind of pain. I stood up on my feet and I looked at the ground. I saw a basketball-sized cactus sort of trying to reinflate itself. The quills on it were thick and at least 2 inches long. At this point, my right butt cheek was on fire. I turned around and I saw 100 quills sticking out of my butt. I looked at the cactus in disbelief. It was the only living thing on the ground in that area. Had I fallen where I ran into the cliff, I would have missed the cactus completely. But instead, I turned and walked a half a dozen steps before I fell and turned my butt cheek into a bullseye. I spent the next half hour pulling cactus quills out of my butt. I even hid behind the monstrous boulder so I could take my clothes off, and I still didn't get all the quills out. Some of the quills were buried beneath my skin, but at least I got enough of them out to be able to drive home. When I was religious, I came up with a theory about eternity and guardian angels. Apparently, time is irrelevant in the eternities. The past, present, and future are all present before God. If that is actually true and guardian angels exist, then I could easily be my own guardian angel. Why is that something to consider? Would I direct myself to the precise spot at the top of a cliff just so that I would land right on top of a cactus? I sure would. Before I headed to my car, I looked the cliff up and down one last time, and I swear I heard a throng of gut-busting laughter. If I was my own guardian angel and I made myself land on a cactus, would I gather a crowd to witness it? I sure would. That's exactly the kind of thing I would do.